Welcome back. David Hertel in for Elias. Well, after months of anticipation, yesterday, Energy Minister Pierre Fitzgibbon tabled a massive energy reform bill that will transform Quebec's relationship with energy, not only for months, years, but decades to come. Pierre Fitzgibbon is the minister responsible for energy, innovation, and the economy. He joins me now. Minister Fitzgibbon, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Mr. Hertel.
So, first question, a lot to get to with this bill. It's massive, a lot of different angles here. First of all, the impact on consumers. The bill limits the increase of the hydro bill to 3% until 2026. After that, it could go higher. There's going to be a transition fund to help certain Quebecers cope with that increase. The social contract, unwritten, of course, in Quebec society for the past decades is that, yes, we may be one of the most taxed jurisdictions in Quebec, but at the same time, we get cheap energy. That seems to be changing now. Is that the case? And if so, why?
Well, first of all, I think as you notice, we are now asking La Régie de l'Énergie, the Energy Board, to really requalify or rebase every 3 years the tariffs for residential, commercial, and industrial, and it'll be done at the cost of service, no longer an inflation mechanism of some sort. It's going to be the true cost of service. What we did, though, is that for the residential, in the event that the next 2 years, the actual cost of service would exceed 3%, there'll be a quote-unquote a patch where the government, my ministry, would submit to Hydro-Quebec a check to compensate for the difference. The intent here is to say for 2 years, until the next election, we should just calm the perspective here and cap at 3% while we're going to be preparing what has never been done in Quebec, which is an integrated plan of resources, to demonstrate or to show Quebecers what is the cost of or the requirement to decarbonize and to also create wealth through some selective industrial projects. That never occurred because we had surpluses. So we'll demonstrate how much energy we need, and on the other side, what is the energy mix that is required to fulfill that demand with the price attached to it and also the social cost. So de facto, what we're saying is that for 2 years, let's be calm. Let's ball the ball in play to have the proper discussion, to socialize, get people to be more sensitive to the fact that we don't consume our energy properly, given the behavior was not adjusted because we had surpluses. So we want to do it in sequence. Mm-hmm. It's perhaps going to become an election 26 question, which is fine because it is as you said, the social contract is that we shouldn't pay much for electricity, but you know what? It's going to cost money to decarbonize, and you have to put forward what that cost is and whom should pay for it.
So 3% right now is actually just slightly above inflation already. So for people that, are already struggling, with inflation and all of the consequences of the economic situation right now, you can understand that some people are already worried that their day-to-day lives is going to be affected, with dynamic pricing and future rising energy costs. I understand your point to say, okay, if we're going to go down the decarbonization road, we're going to have to pay for it in some way, but at the same time, you can understand that for some people, seniors and other people and with fixed incomes, it could be very worse, and especially when grocery and gas and everything else costs so much.
Absolutely. That's why the 2% cap we have right now is actually well manageable. And actually, there won't be any significant increase above that, because we all also realize, yourself as well, that the increased cost will come as we put more production from either Quebec or other sources, but that will come in 25, 28, 30. So for the next couple of years, there shouldn't be any shock tarifaire, that won't happen. So therefore, the 3% is not going to cost much, and people accept that the inflation is 2, they're going to pay 2. So I think the incremental hydro costs in the next 2 years are well manageable. After that, then there'll need to be discussion, and the discussion will be who should be paying for the decarbonization. That's the ultimate question.
All right.
Because on the one hand, people say that industries don't pay enough, and other people, experts, realize that the industry is actually subsidizing the residential pricing, right? That 8.5 cents per kilowatt hour. When you go to France, it's going to be 4, 5, 6 times that.
No, absolutely, and that was my next question, because again, the social contract, which you're tearing down, and I respect what you're trying to do, and you're asking, I think, some very important questions here. But again, we've been using the famous L tariff to attract businesses and industry for decades as well. Very cheap hydro has been our calling card. You've used it yourself in the Legault government to attract industry. Now that seems to also be put in play, and that you're going to charge more for industrial hydro use. And so are you concerned about the impact on Quebec's attractiveness?
I am, but at the same time, and we're trying to find this balance, because what you're talking about, I mean, I think it's worth explaining it, because it's not that easy unless you're into it. But as we know, we have the bloc patrimonial. That's 165 terawatt hours. You're familiar with that? That bloc patrimonial never got indexed.
Never.
For the industrial, got indexed only for residential and commercial.
Correct.
I'm changing that and saying, starting 26, we're going to index the industrial. Now, it ain't going to be a choc tarifaire, but it's going to be an increase. And I'm doing that because we're trying to find this fairness. I do not accept the comment about the Dollarama of electricity, because at the L rate, the reality is the L rate is subsidizing the residential rate. So therefore, it's a paradox here. But at the same time, I mean, it's going to be significant investment that needs to be made by Hydro-Québec in the next 20, 25 years. So we need to have the discussion. And if we want only the industries to pay for it, well, there won't be economic development. Some people may like that, but then we're not going to be rich enough to have the other social contract. If we charge a residential, at which rate are we going to do it? Frankly, there's all kinds of answers to that question. I think it's appropriate now, through this integrated plan of resources, to put the ball in play and to have the discussion and do it in a proper time. It'll take a year or two. There's no rush here. We're not facing a mountain here. We're just climbing slowly.
The main objective, the overarching objective of this bill, and you've said it before, it's to get to complete decarbonization in Quebec by 2050. Now, right now in our energy mix, as you know, our total energy consumption, around 50% of it is still fossils.
Correct.
And it's been stable even back when I was an environment minister. I mean, it hasn't really moved in the right direction in at least a decade. How does this bill, this transformation, how do you think it will impact positively on our reliance on fossils?
Well, I think that's the key, and the intent, and hopefully it will materialize. The intent is this integrated plan of resources will show that if we want to decarbonize, perhaps we'll have to accept, by the way, to use renewable natural gas as opposed to say there's no more natural gas, and I'll get to that later. Maybe we'll say, you know what, we need 15 dams. People say, whoa.
Or nuclear, maybe.
Oh, nuclear, or exactly. But that discussion needs to take place with the facts properly identified. And I think people will say, some people will say, you know what, why should we decarbonize? We don't want that. Fine. If we decide to change our plan and not decarbonize, it will be a social call. And it's not going to be government, or if you want to decarbonize, well, there's a price to pay. So it is delicate, and I think the world, by the way, is facing that. You look at, and I've been to 2 COPs right now, and I'm sure you've been to some yourself.
Yes.
And some countries say, no, we're not going to decarbonize to 2050 because we're now we're out of the doldrum. We are in a development curve.
India, for example.
Good example, right? And others as well. So therefore, we need to be sensitive to that, because there's so dogmatism in that discussion that sometimes is not based on facts. But so it is going to be a very, very challenging. Not challenging, it's going to be a very interesting debate. And nuclear is one of them, because right now there's no nuclear projects in sight. But maybe we have to.
You're opening the door to the conversation, at least.
Absolutely, the conversation, yes.
Okay, so I have to ask, because a lot of our listeners have gone through a lot of difficult times with the existing grid. And there's a lot of issues with the maintenance of the hydro grid. The Vérificatrice Générale has written reports about it. Hydro is trying to catch up. There's been a lot of different power outages that are caused by the poor maintenance status of the grid, especially here in Montreal, the West Island, South Shore. Is any of this money going to go to maintaining the actual grid? I know you're in development mode, and this is a big legacy piece for the future, but what about right now, the status of the grid?
No, it's a good question. And if you go back in the 2035 action plan that Hydro-Quebec has filed to the government in November, and I'm going by memory, I don't have it in front of me, but I think of the 185 billion investment, I think it's 40 billion of which is for maintenance and for a transport line that needs to be enhanced because we don't have enough transport for all the new production we have. So clearly, Michael Sabia and the team have allocated a lot of effort because that's the elephant in the room. And people say, well, it's great to develop, but can you supply what we have? So clearly, vegetation issues that we faced in the last the January and 2 years ago. Clearly, we were not as bad as in 2008 or 98. Sorry. So Hydro-Quebec has identified significant capex that needs to be done to maintain and enhance the current network.
So my final question, and this is clearly your legacy piece. It's not if you haven't done anything else. You've been a very, very busy economic development minister since your tenure began in 2018. But, okay, there have been questions about your future, and I want to delve into those. But the way you've been talking about this bill and coupled with the Michael Sabia plan and the choices and the conversations that we have to make, the way I'm listening to this, it harkens back to the choices that Quebec made back in 62 when there was actually an election on, okay, do we want to nationalize hydroelectricity in Quebec? We have a choice as a society to make. And that was transcendent, right? The modern Quebec started with that election in 62. Are you actually seeing the same parallels here? Do you think we're at that juncture where one way or another, we have to transform the way we deal with energy in Quebec in all aspects, and that's going to be a choice to be made by Quebecers during the 2026 election? Are you seeing this as the question for the next election?
If you had asked me that a year ago, I'd have said no. But clearly, over the last year, as I made some statements, different tribunes, and I get people to write me saying, "Well, we have not elected you to do this. This is because you said it's a social contract relationship between Quebecers and something they love, which is Hydro-Quebec." I think you're right, and I think that we have not done the 3% hookup until 26 for that reason, because that 3% patch is a government patch which every government could change. The next government could decide it's good or bad depending who's elected, including ourselves. So, but I think you're right, and I think that this plan intégré des ressources, the integrated resource plan, the cost, it's not going to be about do we privatize or not Hydro-Quebec. That's been done. We don't privatize Hydro-Quebec. A lot of people are claiming that is what I have in mind. It's not what I have in mind at all. However, the cost of the electron, who's going to pay for it, and how going to be done? I think I have a feeling now one of the key the 26 election question will be how do we decarbonize and who's going to pay for it? And I think it's going to be center to every party. Every party will have to disclose how they look at this, and I think you're right. It could become a very important part of the election campaign.
Well, the conversation begins this fall with the parliamentary consultations. You're a lot of big work ahead of you. I really appreciate your time. Have a good summer, Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Risto.
Pierre Fitzgibbon, Minister responsible for the economy, innovation, and energy of Quebec.